This is the Game Changers Experience. Deep dive conversations with leading business disruptors, Olympic athletes, celebrities, entrepreneurs, and influencers from around the world. This show will teach you insights about the winning principles in mindset, productivity, marketing, branding, entrepreneurship, business strategy, and more. Hosted by productivity authority, business strategist, former elite athlete, author, and public speaker, Adam Strong.
Hey you guys, and welcome to the Game Changers Experience with myself, Adam Strong, and welcome to Power Up Thursdays. This is a new series of amazing new shows on Thursdays. Thursdays is actually the new Fridays because I know that some of you go into kind of like the weekend mode. So Power Up Thursdays is just going to help you to really kind of drive the momentum, the much needed momentum that some of you lack, and some of the clarity and stuff. So I'm going to share some of the insights and some great golden nuggets that I learned in growing a successful business. And today I really want to talk about something which is something that I have been working on actually, and I've been working on since from a very, very young age. And we're going to be covering how to develop a winning mentality. Because one of the things that I have found, and this is so important in entrepreneurship and running a business, more importantly, is without mindset is essentially the foundation. It's the foundation or one of the core fundamentals in growing any business, right? So if you approach me and said, hey, Adam, I know that you're renowned and great at giving people a business blueprint so that I can grow my business. Well, yes, I could develop that, but and give it to you and create it for you. But essentially, without the mindset that goes with it first, it falls on deaf ears. It's not going to go well, right? It's a bit like, if you said to me, hey, Adam, I want to run the London Marathon, for example, okay, but I've got zero experience in doing so, and can you design a plan for me? And so I designed a plan for you. The likely chances that you actually successfully complete the marathon is quite slim. But if you had conditioned your mindset prior to actually embracing the plan, then you'd have a much higher success rate. So I really want to talk about this on a much more deeper level, more than importantly. So as I mentioned last week's Power Up Thursday show, and most of you know I'm a former elite long distance runner, used to study and train with Olympic athletes. One of the things that I've learned, and what I love actually talking about, is talking about my experience from elite sport and bringing it into the business world. So I remember actually, which is really, really interesting actually, there's a lot of things that I take from my athletic career and bring it and teach it to you guys listening in. And one of the things, so there are a number of things that you need in order to condition your mindset, but also build a mindset for the success of the future. So number one is, first of all, you've got to take personal responsibility. One of the things that I have observed in the entrepreneurial world in particular is when you don't succeed or you fail at something or whatever it is, you start to use the blame game, right? You start to blame your partner, you start to blame your kids, blame your colleagues or whatever it is, right? The point I'm trying to make is that for every finger that you point at somebody, there's always 5 fingers pointing back at you. Okay, take personal responsibility. So that's the first thing in order to create this this mindset. Secondly, is that you've got to make a decision. Okay, whatever the decision is, but decide, and if you're going to move forwards or you're going to stay as you are. Okay, so obviously it depends on circumstances, but you've got to make the decision. Okay, you either go forwards or you stay as you are. Okay, so that's the second big thing. Thirdly is belief, right? So without belief systems, okay, if you haven't developed a belief system, okay, then you're never going to get anywhere. If you don't believe that you can be a successful entrepreneur, if you don't believe that you can grow your business, if you don't believe that you can help people, then what people are going to do, or, conversations that you have with potential clients or partners, people are going to feel that. They're going to feel this kind of they're going to have this intuition. Now, when I'm having conversations with a lot of people, I go with my gut feeling. And if it doesn't feel right and there's something missing or whatever it is, I don't know if you've ever had this feeling, but when you have a conversation with someone, you just think to yourself, this doesn't feel right, and you can't quite pinpoint what it is, but you've really got to believe in yourself. I remember having a conversation actually quite recently through Facebook, through a friend of mine. And she was trying to decide on how much money she should charge for her program. Yeah. And one of the big sticking points for a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners, right, is that number one, they don't like asking for money, which is a completely different subject altogether. Number two is that they felt that every time that they get a no from somebody, they would become emotionally attached to that no, right? And they'd start to compare and start to judge and start to have negative thought patterns around why I'm not good enough. Why is my product, why is my service, why is it not good enough for these people? Because they're so emotionally attached. But you've got to believe in yourself more than anything else, all right? Because if you don't believe in yourself, and for those people that say no, by the way, there's a reason. There might be a number of reasons. It might be a timing issue. It might mean when I hear the word no, by the way, I think, okay, well, it's maybe a no now, but maybe in the future it might be a yes. Okay, so again, that's another great topic that we'll talk about further on. Number 4 is attitude. You've got to have a great attitude, okay? A great attitude towards your life, a great attitude towards just a great attitude towards the outlook of life in general. Because if you don't have a great attitude, then the relationships that you build along the way, okay, it's going to be severely affected by the results that you achieve. So you've got to have a great attitude, all right? So that's really, really important. Number 5, which I think is probably one of the, from my perspective, is going back to your why. We had a great session with our members in the Game Changers Next Level Club. And one of the things that I talked about was how to develop your why, right? What is your deep why? And one of the, I mentioned a great YouTube video, a TED Talk by Simon Sinek on how to develop a really powerful why, and I gave some great examples in that. But go back to your why. What's the reason why, you are on this earth? What's the reason why you've been created? What is your bigger reason why you're essentially contributing towards people? So it's really important to go back to that why factor. And why is it important to you? Why is it important to your values? So I want you to really kind of, it's a bit like, going in front of the mirror and having a Q&A session with yourself, right? And interrogating yourself and thinking to yourself, what's the reason why I'm doing this? What's the reasons, and I suppose challenge yourself more than anything else, which is so important to do so. Questioning, why do you get out of bed? Why do you do a certain, why is it that you put content out there? Why is it that you help people, really kind of why. What is the big why? And I think that's so important to do that. The next thing actually is all around eliminating distractions, because the world right now, it's a little bit upside down, as you can imagine, but there are so many distractions out there, right? Whether it be the media, social media, whether it be kids, whether it be the environment that you're in, there are so many distractions. So what you've got to do is essentially you've got to figure out, if you're being affected, if your mindset's being affected from the distractions, you've got to write out those distractions and find out ways to remove those distractions. It could be, and I'll mention this actually a little bit later on, but it could be something really, really simple, really, really simple. As I mentioned, the normal stuff, TV and procrastination, things like that. The next thing for me really is to learn from others, because I always figured that if you learn from others people's mistakes, then what you do is essentially you shortcut your ways to success. Because if you learn from others, you learn from their mistakes, then it gives you more of a platform to essentially not do those mistakes yourself. Now, I'm not saying that making mistakes is a bad thing. What I'm saying is that it's best to avoid mistakes, especially at the very beginning. If you are listening to this and you are a start business, or you have a side hustle business, whatever you want to call it, trying to minimize in those mistakes is going to be crucial in your success. Next thing is, don't be afraid to try new things. What I see right now in the world is that people are scared about adapting, right? You've got to be nimble, you've got to be agile, and you've got to learn how to adapt with times ahead. All right. You've got to learn how to do that, because if you don't embrace that, what's going to happen is it's really going to affect many different things. It's going to affect many different things. And, just, you've got to embrace this. From my perspective, you've got to embrace new ways of thinking. You've got to embrace, try new things, right? I know that I've had numerous conversations with people, and, some of them are in the service-driven business. Some of them have bricks and mortars business, and, trying to kind of, stay in your comfort zone, right? And essentially not just stay in your comfort zone, but also just to kind of move things along in the digital world, because most of us are working from home, and, there are new ways in which we can connect with people on a different scope. Next thing for me, which I find is probably one of the most important parts, is surrounding yourself with who you become. So there's a saying that I teach a lot of my clients, is that you surround yourself with who you become, with the 5 most common people you hang around with. So, if you are hanging around with broke people, then guess what? You'll be a broke person. If you are hanging around with negative people, then guess what? You will become a negative person. If you want to become wealthy, then hang around with wealthy people. It's as simple as that. But surround yourself with who you become. It's so important, because they will help support you. They will help lift you up. They will take you to the next level. And there are many different examples to do so as well. If you are living with negative partner, husband, wife, whatever it might be. I'm not a life coach, by the way. I just wanted to point that out. But I can't fix those relationships. That's something separate. That's not me, right? But what I can say to you is that if you surround yourself with mood hoovers and energy vampires and blood-sucking negative people, then you're going to become that person, is what I'm trying to say. The next thing for me is probably something which people don't do enough of, especially entrepreneurs and business owners, because we live in a very fast-moving world. And we're always looking at innovative ways to grow a business. But the next thing for me is to evaluate yourself, all right? And become, and it's interesting because a couple of shows ago, we had a great show with Dan Tolson on emotional intelligence. And for me, evaluating yourself in order to do better, in order to be better, is to become emotionally aware about our strengths and weaknesses. Because if we know what our strengths and weaknesses are, then we need to focus on our strengths and delegate our weaknesses. All right. So really, really important to do that, because, if you don't evaluate yourself, then you don't know where to make improvements in your life. All right. I have a great tool, by the way, in my book called Fit Body, Fit Business. And there is a model in that book. And what it does is it asks specific questions around, it covers different areas of your life. okay, from emotional to mindset and various other things. Ask you certain questions. At the end of those, you have to then tally up a score. And at the end of that score, it then gives you an evaluation about which areas of your life that you need to make improvements to. I call this the success circle of success. All right. So check that out. It's called Fit Body, Fit Business. It's available on Amazon, so forward. In fact, there's a copy right behind me here on my left shoulder, Fit Body, Fit Business. So that's the next thing. The next thing is to do the work, right? You've got to put the work in. If you want to develop this winning mindset, you've got to put the work in. You've got to get yourself out of that comfort zone and take fast action, because action cures fear. That's the reality, and I know that there's a lot of fear out there at the moment, especially with all the uncertainty that goes around with it. But do the work, right? Do the work and reap the rewards at the end. I can guarantee you, you'll get that switch. You'll get that change in you. I can guarantee you that. And the last thing for me, which I think is really important, is be prepared to take calculated risks. Because if you take risk out, you take opportunity out. All right. I'll say that again. If you take risk out, you take opportunity out. Because, I know that there are some of you listening to this right now don't like taking those risks, whatever that risk might be. Okay. And because each and every single one of us are on a different journey. We've all got different businesses, right? But if you don't take those risks, then you're never going to know if you know it's a good idea or not. And I learned this from a mentor or a coach, is that if you're not prepared to take risk, then you're never ever going to know if it's worked. So you live a life of regrets. And I don't want to go to my grave and live a life of regrets, which is so important. I remember when I was an athlete, and I mentioned this at the beginning, actually, developing the mindset was the foundation before even running, because as I mentioned to you, and if you've ever read my story, if you've ever get the opportunity to go onto my website and read my story, which is adamstrong.net, you'll be able to read some of the things that happened to me when I first started running, and all of the negative, I suppose, all the negative voices in my head that were telling me that I wasn't good enough, that I started making judgments about other people and things like that, really. But you've really got to kind of switch and change things around a little bit. So I hope that kind of gives you a really good basis for developing a winning mindset. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, by the way, me or my team, and they'll be able to get back to me, and I'll try and get back to you in due course. I hope that you've enjoyed today's episode of the Game Changers Power Up Thursdays episode. If you have enjoyed it, feel free to leave a 5-star review on the point below, whichever platform that you decide are on. And also, I was going to say, if you're not already part of it as well, feel free to also join our Game Changers Facebook group. We have so much great fun and interactive conversations on there as well. So I'd love to invite you to come along. It's free to come along and listen in. I host a load of events, which I don't normally do. It's only normally for exclusive people of the group. So listen, I hope you've been enjoying today's episode, and have a fantastic day, week, month, whenever you're listening to this. Have a good one. See you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hey, you guys, I just want to say thank you so much for listening in to this episode of the Game Changers Experience. I hope that you got some amazing value, some great insights, and golden nuggets that you can implement into your business straight away. I would really, really appreciate it if you could leave a 5-star review on the button below. Have a fantastic day, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.